Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Sunday Shot. Thank you very much for joining us again. You will see I am back on the land of the Eora people in front of that grey curtain that you all love so much. I will say up front, we are pre-recording today's episode because very shortly I will be winging away to China for a week's holiday, the school holidays. So if there's anything which is already obsolete and out of date, that is the reason why, but hopefully there won't be. I am joined today, as ever, by my co-host of the Sunday Shot, Dave Milner. Welcome, Dave.
G'day, Joe. G'day, everybody. Pleasure to be here.
That's fantastic. And we have two great guests joining us today to chew over the events of the week. First up is we have the author of The Idea of Australia, a TV adaptation of which will be dropping on October 15, Julianna Schultz. Welcome back to the Sunday Shot, Julianne. It's great to have you back with us.
Thank you.
And returning again is another Shot favourite, Marque Lawyers, Michael Bradley, also legal correspondent of Crikey. Michael, thank you for being with us here on the Sunday Shot.
Lovely to be here.
Now, it's good that we have a lawyer because there are a few legal things that we're going to dive into today. The first of which is the 20-point peace plan. I would say Donald Trump's latest attempt to get the Nobel Peace Prize, attempting to stop yet another war of the litany of wars that he has apparently stopped in the last few months. What would the world do without him? Michael, you've dived into this a bit. What do you think? Are we going to now have peace, harmony and love in the Middle East as a result of a deal negotiated between a war criminal and a looming fascist? Not that's a loaded question.
Well, 100% not. I mean, my initial reaction to it is it is fascinating and unsurprising to see the sort of global response, instant global response. Oh my God! Thank you, Donald. You've brought peace in our time, and everybody is just scrambling to sign up to this deal. And I think, wow, like for such an obvious idiot, he's also incredibly clever at manipulating people into contortions like this. I mean, this is the man who was going to turn it into Disneyland with no Palestinians, and so now he turns on a dime and says, "Yeah, the Palestinians can stay, and I'm going to be president for life of Gaza, and it'll all be wonderful." And everyone goes, "Thank you." So I find it, like, the psychology of that is fascinating, but. There's a lot. The thing to love about this plan is that it is a far better thing than continuation of what we have, because it would bring, if executed, an end to the carnage, the genocide that is just rolling on day after day after day, and that is the success of the Israeli plan, backed and supported by the Americans. That is where we're at. That we'll accept that. So yes, anything that means you stop shooting at the Palestinian civilians is good.
It is interesting, though, that we're talking about we'll accept it. We're not talking about the Palestinians accept it, because they haven't even been asked if they want to accept it whatsoever.
Exactly. That's right. And that's the fundamental fatal flaw in the plan, in that it's just another plan that's being imposed on the Palestinian people without any consultation of them at all. But it also it is set up on a set of assumptions about where we are and why we're there, which are all about Gaza as a hotbed of terrorism and a threat to Israel. And
the whole
and
thing
it is.
Sorry.
It is going to be de-radicalized according to the plan. That's in paragraph 1. Israel's not going to be de-radicalized because apparently it doesn't require it. Israel isn't going to be stopped from the plan that the government of Israel has been openly advocating and executing for many, many years, of occupying and annexing ultimately the whole of Palestine. So this one side, this one population on one side of the equation who's being demonized and characterized as the problem are now being told, we've got the solution for you. We're going to impose democracy on you. It is, and the people who are going to run this for you, Donald Trump and Tony Blair, good guys. Like, they don't have any baggage.
None.
I just, I don't know. I can't put myself in the shoes of a Palestinian person in Gaza, but I would imagine if I was one of them, I'd be thinking, are you serious?
Yeah.
I've spoken to a bunch of them and they're appalled. This is, when I looked at the plan, I kept thinking this is what they would have put out in the 1700s and the 1600s and the 80s. This is colonizers colonizing. I cannot see it, especially with Tony Blair's involvement as well. This is just a consolidation of the Western Empire, and before too long, we are just going to see it completely absorbed into Israel. I'm sure that this is pretense to allow that to happen. I don't buy it for a minute.
Julianne, one of the things I was going to ask you, there have been no Palestinians involved at all in the negotiation of this plan. And we have had Netanyahu come out definitively and say, well, the IDF is not retreating. There is going to be a security perimeter indefinitely. So the occupation continues. And he has explicitly said that in the plan there is no mention of the two-state solution, so a Palestinian state, and that we will continue, i.e. Israel will continue, to forcibly oppose that. So it's hard to see how peace could be engendered by this plan, let alone the fact that there are so many fundamental issues which are not mentioned at all, which we won't get into in a minute.
It was interesting that Haaretz, the newspaper in the Israeli newspaper, which is sort of slightly critical of of the Netanyahu administration, their cartoon had a picture of Trump and Netanyahu with Netanyahu with a Pinocchio nose. So clearly they're taking it with a very big grain of salt. I was very struck by the excellent press club talk that Ben Saul and Chris Sidoti did, and if you haven't seen it, I really recommend take time to have a look at it. It's on ABC iView. And Ben Saul's making the obvious point that if there's going to be an agency which is going to be overseeing a peace process of this nature, it needs to be United Nations, not a party in it, which is the United States and Israel, imposing something. But I quite liked Chris Sidoti's response. He said, look, I back it 100%. He said, because it's smoke and mirrors. But if in the period when people are backing it, the bombing stops, the starvation stops, the hostages are released, the Palestinian prisoners, political prisoners are released, get that out of the way. And then if we find it smoke and mirrors, at least you've got a new baseline. And I thought that's probably a pragmatic way that's probably why, to your earlier point, why is everyone jumping on board? Because it's the only thing that's on offer. And if it can at least have that immediate thing of, of stopping the carnage, something else might come. But, it's a long shot because, Pinocchio knows.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. And it would also require, I'm not going to become here a spokesperson for Hamas, but if they release the hostages and they de-arm, which is, I think, the two first fundamental points in the plan, or certainly the top of the the tree, then they've kind of lost all their leverage if Netanyahu just decides, as he has so many times in the past, to renege on everything that he has signed up for.
But morally, I mean, morally is already on shaky ground, and morally, internationally, if he then didn't at least initially honour the intent, if everyone's behind it, he's on much more dangerous ground than he even is at the moment. And I think that releasing of those, I think it's 900 Palestinian people held in Israeli jails, so the combination of that, is obvious. Look, it's a bloody dog's break. It's just ghastly. It's so distressing. But I mean, when we're saying, it's like Chris Sidoti says, well, it ain't perfect, but if it has that immediate effect, well, who wants to stop it?
I'm skeptical that it will. I really am. When Netanyahu has spoken openly about Libya, Lebanon, Jordan, the Greater Israel Project, I think we're exercising a certain amount of cognitive dissonance if we think it's going to stop what he really obviously wants to do.
Well, look, I think you can read a lot into Netanyahu's reaction, which was enthusiastic and qualified. He said, we absolutely will sign up to this plan, and if Hamas doesn't do it, that's this is going to happen the easy way or the hard way. And so he's
at the moment, don't they?
but he's playing his game, and this suits him.
It's the same game as well. We've had a bunch of these moments where they've invited Hamas to sit down. Oh, Hamas won't do it. We have to continue the genocide, and on they go for another 6 months.
I do think that big walkout in the United Nations after the Netanyahu speech, that has some heft, as well as the recognition stuff and so on. I mean, there is clearly an international mood which is not going to tolerate this much longer, and I guess the risk that the Israelis face is that you then start seeing things which many would argue should have already been implemented, sanctions and a whole bunch of other things against Israel that haven't actually been haven't been done in any serious fashion. So I mean, look, who are we to second guess what's going on at that sort of level? I mean, we're not privy to the internal politics.
No, look, we're not. I mean, it does seem sort of extraordinary, as was mentioned, that Tony Blair, whose track record in the Middle East is not ideal, is apparently going to be heading that underneath Donald Trump. So it is a bit incredible that we've got Tony Blair so involved, apparently, and not just him as an individual, but his organisation, the Global Institute. And this is what had been proposed. Chairman of the board there, that's Donald Trump. All of these people here, there's quite a few billionaires coming in, some from Egypt. So that's, I guess, the token Arabic involvement. But down the bottom, you see the Palestinian Executive Authority, and that is the operational kind of delivery mode beneath everything else, and that is the only place where it's proposed that we will actually have Palestinians involved in the running of their own country.
Don't you love us? Don't you love us? An organisational chart, doesn't it just make everything so wonderful? We've done a restructure and we've got the org chart.
Did the English have PowerPoint presentations in the 1700s for their colonies? I wonder how they laid those documents out.
So yes, that's the Board of Peace. No Palestinians, but very vague conditions generally throughout the proposed plan. You've got potential exploitation of Palestinian resources, no accountability for what actually has happened in the war, and then of course it fails to mention the illegal settlements, borders, compensation, and refugees. So it does seem that there are some fairly fundamental points that haven't been addressed by this plan, and there's lots of people rubbing their hands together at the possibility, it seems to me, still of that Riviera on the in the Middle East.
There's not much mention of the fact that there isn't really a Gaza left, that 90% of all buildings have been destroyed, so there isn't really places to go back to other than concentration camps.
Yeah. So all of this as well came around the same time as we had a really quite extraordinary gathering that the self-titled Secretary of War Pete Hesketh, known to most of us as a weekend Fox News presenter, up to a few months ago. He self-styled Secretary of War because he actually can't be officially changed until it's been approved by Congress, who has shown no sign of wanting to do that. So at the moment, it's just sort of him striding around the stage giving his TED Talks. But Julianna, it was kind of an incredible thing because it required all of the Star Generals and Admirals to be brought together from all over the world, including from active war zones, to listen to his TED Talk.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing, isn't it? I love that, the general, the retired general, he put out his social media saying, oh, this was something that Hitler had done, and to which Hesketh replied, oh, thanks for the tip or something, something to that effect.
Was kind of incredible, wasn't it? Yeah,
and then he got to the end of it. So if you haven't got the message, I suggest you go and buy my book, The War on Warriors.
Yeah, he used it as a bit of a promotional opportunity for his Amazon book.
There's a moment during this address where Trump sort of meets a quiet room and he acknowledges it and he says, you're going to need to start laughing at my jokes if you want your careers to go further than this. He's talking to a room full of generals.
Yeah, I think there was moments for both of them where they, excuse me, they paused for the laugh or the applause that didn't come. I mean, I think, who was it? Ronnie Cheng, who said, excuse me, that for a whole lot of military types, they still never heard something bomb quite as loudly as that. What was it? It was FO. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, the notion of creating the sort of the enemy within, which are these generals are now meant to be, commanding their troops to be attacking and teaching training courses on what they do in cities. I mean, there was a very good former military lawyer on PBS NewsHour talking about, like there is nothing in the manuals that teach people how to, be soldiers in America about dealing with American citizens in American cities. There's just and as she said, applying the rules of engagement that operate in third countries just would not cut it, and you didn't want to run the risk of the American military being involved in something like that. But, he's tried it out, he's tried it out with not with the full military, but with the National Guard and with the, the unidentified ICE people. I mean, it's, I'd always thought that when it came to rounding up the 12 million or whatever it was that they said they had to round up to do the mass deportations, that, that was the sort of language that was being used during the election campaign. To my mind, I thought, well, that's just not going to happen. Where are they going to put them? Who's going to do it? Who's going to do the rounding up? Well, they've got more applications to join ICE than they can deal with. I mean, there are people obviously quite happy to be involved in this sort of.
Might have something to do with a $100,000 joining fee in the country. But Michael, one of the things that Trump was saying was this notion, and this is a quote: "America is under invasion, but we're under invasion from within." And that for him, the civilian enemy is no different than a foreign enemy, and that he was going to, as he has already in Democrat-run territories, kind of stick the American military onto the American people.
Yeah. It's a very deliberate step, as I think almost every step. I mean, nobody has control over Trump's words. That's sort of the random factor in this, but the theatre of it is planned, and I think they'll be delighted with the outcome. The fact that the generals didn't clap or cheer is irrelevant, and in fact probably suits their purpose. The fact is they got every general in the American military into a room to sit through that insanity and degraded the integrity of the American military accordingly down to their level. Like, nobody got up and walked out. Nobody got up and shot them. So mission accomplished, I think. And this is part of a mission to co-opt the military and remove it as a threat to the administration. And that is in train. I think Trump's been very explicit about his process of identifying and disempowering all rival centres of power to him. And the cities are one of those major centres of power. And that's why he's been so ardent about this idea of sending the military into American cities. And he's just going to continue that, and he's going to keep ramping that up because those cities are rival power centres. Using the military to do that achieves two purposes, because it degrades both those institutions at the same time and brings them within the architecture of his authoritarian regime, the one that he's trying to build. And he has legal weaponry available to him to achieve that constitutionally. So they've been very explicit about this and exploring these ideas for quite a while. They have, there's an act from 1807 or whatever it is that he can use to federalize the National Guard. He has the ability to declare a national emergency on basically any ground that he wants. And he can effectively declare martial law at any point and turn the American military on the people of America without breaking the law.
Yeah. I think that's one of the really...
The terrifying thing here is how predictable the next steps are, because this is the fascist playbook and we've seen it a bunch of times now. And what happened this week is that he's basically trying to describe anti-capitalist sentiment and anti-American sentiment as he wants to make it illegal, essentially. This is what will be... These repressive forces of the state will be weaponized basically against genuinely left-wing people in the future.
Yeah, so, he's declared Antifa a terrorist organisation. It's the first non-existent organisation to be declared a terrorist organisation. That's cool. So he's putting labels on what he perceives to be his opposition, which is basically anyone who disagrees with him or he doesn't like. And they're ramping up the rhetoric constantly about this as a war, about the inherent violence of the left and these anti-American forces which are destroying the country from within. I think we've heard that language before somewhere. The enemy within, and this is, yes, it's all straight out of the playbook. And these institutional forces or these rival power centres are falling like dominoes because they are feeling unable to stand up. Like, why is it that not a single general walked out of that fucking room? I mean, what a demeaning spectacle.
That's right. Yeah.
And yet not one felt that they could do that. I mean, they could. Maybe they'd be in jail now. They'd probably be chucked out of the military, lose their career. But
that would be better, surely, than sitting in there. Because one of the other things that Trump has done in relation to the military, Julianne, is this executive order that he signed to provide training for a quick reaction force to help quell civil disturbances by the enemy from within. So some kind of shock troop corps that can go in separate from ICE, separate from the National Guard, kind of a new...
new Marines.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing. I mean, it's... but I just want to pick up on what Michael was saying before. I mean, going back to that legislation of 1808 or, whatever it is, I mean, the crews of people behind him, like he's almost the sort of unpredictable avatar of this whole game. It's not a game. It's much worse than that that's going on. But the depth of knowledge and expertise that is sitting there, who knew that there was an 1807 Act that said blah, I mean, presumably people learned it in law school, but, for it was stuck in their heads well enough to actually be drawing this, and hundreds of others of these sort of bits of, legal background, all that sort of stuff that's happening behind the scene to actually justify these executive orders. It's not like they're the rants of a crazy man. They're really seriously considered documents, and they will be legally challenged in many cases. But a lot of them won't, and they will stand because these are serious rants. I mean, I sort of think about it, and it's interesting watching the generals. I think of it in a way as being what Trump is doing and the whole crew behind him. These are people who, like the tech guys are the pale, frail males, the mad, economists who've been pushing their button, they're sort of running their arguments, as the rest of the world has been moving on beyond their sort of narrow view of how things should be done, that these guys, it's sort of like the revenge of the humiliated man. Like these men have in various points of their lives been humiliated because they've not been of the moment, and here they are seeking their revenge. I mean, how in anyone's imagination can J.D. Vance or Trump or any of the others call the Democrat Party in America a radical left-wing enterprise? I mean, it's the most corporate, conservative, middle-of-the-road sort of, let's work in the system and, take our bits and do what we can. I mean, there is nothing radical about it. It is a corporate machine that happens to present as a political party.
And it does seem that the media is failing to rise to the moment as well. And that might be because at the moment, 5 companies, huge conglomerates now control up to 90% of the marketplace, and all of whom who have in recent times been seeking approval for various mergers. Some still are. We might even have only 4 because we've got the Ellison of Oracle fame, Larry and David, father and son, wanting to also buy Warner Brothers, which would consolidate it even further. But even some of the independent media have not been rising to the occasion. And I think you might have quoted it, actually, Michael, in your recent Crikey article, when Trump's decided to just blow up civilians in the Caribbean waters.
Venezuela.
Yeah, and you've got the New York Times saying, some legal experts have called it a crime to summarily kill civilians not directly taking part in hostilities, even if they are believed to be smuggling drugs. And you think, oh, some legal experts? I think pretty much everybody would say that summarily murdering citizens is probably against the law.
Maybe that's par for the course for the New York Times the last couple of years, to be honest. I don't know if labeling them independent is technically accurate, the way they behave at the moment.
Yeah, I'm really interested in that. Oh, sorry, Michael, you said I'm really interested in it because it was very striking that when Bob Woodward died, when Robert Redford died. Yeah. Sorry, I'll get them right. The Avatar, you see. That when Woodward died, that when Redford died, Woodward said that it had been Redford's encouragement that led he and Carl Bernstein to write All the President's Men, and he did it on the promise that if they wrote the book, he would play Woodward in the movie. Of All the President's Men. So that's sort of 76, and that in a way, I just thought it was really a crucial sort of thing, because that by writing the book and making the movie, that turned what had been, sure, Nixon had gone, but nonetheless, it was an internal American political stoush, it was sort of a bit complicated and stuff, as it was unfolding. You needed the book and the movie to actually consolidate it in the popular imagination. And it did that, both of them did that. And it gave strength to what was happening in many other Western countries, and that was an increasing determination by journalists to exercise more authority against those corporate owners. And I mean, I think in many ways the best example in Australia was the strike by journalists at the Australian in 1975 over the direction to report Whitlam in a particular way, which they went on strike about. It was pretty amazing. It was a professional insult to them. And so you had that period from, the sort of early mid-70s through to the late 80s, where this growing journalist professionalisation took over and really pushed back against those commercial limits, and then the politics sort of came in, and you got separations of media companies and so on. I think that strength of that professionalism and that willingness to act collectively in response to these sorts of assaults has actually been so dramatically diminished now that, it really is the media companies, and the journalists aren't acting in nearly the same way as a countervailing force as they did, a couple of decades ago.
You've touched on such a core truth, Julianne, because across the neoliberal capitalist world, all of these institutions that are meant to protect democracy, like universities, media, even the law, all siloed to a degree, encouraged to bargain individually rather than as collectives, unions have been. And this is just, that's 70 years of eroding what would have been effective resistance for this moment right now. And as we keep talking about, I always come back to during the university protests about Gaza, if the democratic establishment and the liberal media actually decided this was their line and they were going to back these guys standing up to this Trump's fascist oppression, they'd be in a much stronger position now. They didn't. They threw the kids to the wolves, and subsequently every other domino is falling since. And now we've seen the generals not even put up any sort of
and YouTube this week became the latest of the tech companies to bend the knee, paid $24.5 million to make a ridiculous Trump lawsuit go away. This one pertaining to their suspension of his channel after January 6, 2021, where YouTube rightly determined he'd violated the site's policy against inciting violence. But again, just to bend the knee and to make it all smooth for their corporate interests, paid over up to nearly $25 million. Now, what we might do now, you've got...
I was saying we should mention TikTok as well, because that's crucial at the moment. So much of the stuff about Gaza has come out through TikTok, formerly Chinese-owned platform, that now the Americans... And Benjamin Netanyahu this week was crowing about the sale of TikTok. He thinks this is going to be crucial for their information.
Well, and has Murdoch still got a share in that? Or is that,
apparently Murdoch does. It's still a bit unclear because the Ellisons, as in Larry and David, are also owning Paramount and potentially Warner Brothers soon. They too have apparently got some kind of interest, but we don't really yet know. So, look, what we're going to do now is we're going to go to Dave's interview with Grace Tame, friend of the shot, who has a lot to say about Robert Kennedy Jr., autism, and his attack on Tylenol. We're going to have a watch of that. We'll come out, talk about that a bit, and then open the conversation as to whether or not the law can save us in all of this.
Grace Tame, it is wonderful to have you back on the shot. You wrote a cracker of a piece for Crikey about autism and RFK Jr. Now, I guess we'll get this out of the way straight up. You are an autistic Australian. Did you get it from Panadol?
Look, there's a number of possible causes. I could have got it from Panadol. Or if you go to my father's abode, for whatever reason, it's a living, breathing autism diagnosis. The man has upwards of 400 button-up shirts, all arranged in according to the color spectrum, all folded obsessively neatly, and he dresses monochromatically every day, down to his socks and his waistcoats, and he has one duffel jacket in 7 different colors so that he can wear it with different monochromatic outfits.
But did he get it from Panadol?
Panadol, so my dad was born in 1956, which is about the same time that Panadol became publicly available. So he just could be,
Patient zero.
Yeah, look, I think it's more directly undermined by the fact that autism as a concept was formulated around the early 20th century. We're talking like 1911, and then the first recorded diagnosis was actually around 1943. So there's a bit of a missing chunk of time there.
And some pieces of missing information. More seriously,
filled with disinformation.
More seriously, what is your read on RFK and this type of demonization coming out around this condition right now?
Well, again, as disinformation implies, it's deliberate. This entire administration is anti-epistemology. They're anti-history, anti-science, anti-progress, anti-fact. And a lot of that has to do with their profit-seeking motives. So, you get an administration, or in this case, a fast-becoming authoritarian government coming in and just wrecking everything that's in place. And then, this sort of villain savior entrepreneurship that follows, where they provide all of the solutions, and then sort of um, get the benefit, the reflected glory from being this sort of manufactured savior. And yeah, we're seeing it across the board, but I think there's a particularly sinister element to their autism crusade because they've picked up on the fact that whilst autism isn't becoming more prevalent, it's becoming more detectable thanks to advances in neuroscience. And we're understanding more about how the human brain works in many and diverse ways, how the human genome, as opposed to other animals in the animal kingdom who don't have as much variety in their expression of their genome. The human genome is widely expressing. And autism, of course, falls on the spectrum. We obviously have information sharing enabled by the sort of like the global village that we live in on the internet. And that's encouraging more people to seek diagnoses. It's encouraging more people to seek help. And this is a good thing. However, it's being capitalized upon by this band of bad faith businessmen who are ready to make a buck off of anything. And yeah, that they've created the pretext, that and it's a classic example of shit coding. The best disinformation is close to the truth, or has an element of truth in it, that can be sort of wrapped up in pseudoscience that to your average person sounds seductive. It sounds like a good quick fix. It sounds like it makes sense. And they've found some research where there's an association, which is not causation, where they found an association, they've decontextualized it, they've blown it out of proportion, and then they've also spread this alarmist propaganda that is failed eugenics, and also incredibly sexist because it comes back to that tired trope of mothers being blamed for any perceived failure in parenting. Not that autism is a failure in parenting at all. It's not a failure. It's a difference. But yeah, that's my take on it.
I mean, well, to do the balance thing, are you sure that RFK Jr.'s brainworm parasite isn't privy to information that you don't have from decades of medical science?
I can't rule that out. I haven't had any discussions with said deceased brainworm. I think probably exposure to RFK's already rotten brain caused the death of this worm. The worm, according to RFK Jr.'s doctors, actually ate a portion of his brain. I think perhaps the portion of his brain that housed logic and reason and empathy. Again, I can't be sure. Haven't had any direct contact with worm. But it begs the question: does do brainworms?
Where are we at, Grace? Far out. This decline, this anti-science dark age happened so quickly. Let's Dr. Oz. Dr. Oz, what's going on there? You were talking about capitalism and sinister motives for this sort of stuff. Does he have commercial interests in the demonization of a competing medical product?
He absolutely does. So, according to Dr. Oz's public financial disclosure report, he owns between $5 and $25 million worth of shares in an online health product marketplace called iHerb, which is a leading stocker of leucovorin, this new drug that has been touted as a cure, as a method of treatment for autism symptoms, nondescript autism symptoms, which of course are as hard to define as human consciousness. So yeah, I would say there's motive there for Dr. Oz, who has a track record of torturing beagle puppies as part of his research. I think about 300 of them died in the process. So, great person.
Jesus. Takes me a while to shock me nowadays, but that's okay. You cut to the root of it, all of this, and you said that, autism isn't something that needs to be treated. It is just a difference. We all have different roles. We have different functions, different skills, different cons that in a healthy society could prop up each other and work for each other. There's a native people, I think it's Inuit, that have their word for autism just means in their own time, in their own way. And it's much more understanding concept than, I don't know, demonizing a group of people and back in the background building concentration camps for them eventually.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's important to acknowledge that, as I said before, autism falls on a spectrum, because there's such a variation in symptom profiles and the intensity of those symptom profiles. And autism co-occurs like anything can potentially co-occur with other conditions that can aggravate it. And I'm not in any way dismissing or downplaying the intensity and therefore difficulty that autism can have for not only the individual, but for their family and for their support network. Now, I just want to clarify, I'm you said I'm autistic, but in terms of my exposure to autism in general, my mum retired recently from youth work. She was working with high needs kids whose parents had relinquished responsibility and control of their children to the state. And my father was a public high school teacher for 35 years. And in the latter third of his career, he was exclusively teaching kids with higher needs. And, he went above and beyond in his role. He was often going out to some of the lower socioeconomic districts where these kids would be sleeping in their clothes on mattresses. He'd have to get them dressed. He'd have to provide them food because they weren't provided with food. And because of various factors, these kids would sometimes resort to extreme physical violence. And my mum witnessed that as well in her role. And, this is something that it's not as simple as going, autism, yay. It is, as I said, this sort of broad spectrum. But I think also too, in that we need to remember or try to find some neutrality, because of course there are always going to be extremes of anything in human life, in life in general. But there's I think an underrepresentation, a lack of representation of the positive sides of autism, the things that autistic people have to offer, even autistic people who are non-speaking, which is incredibly difficult and prohibitive, obviously, not just for the person, but for the rest of their environment. But there's so much in that to teach the world about, the different ways that we can communicate, the different ways that we can think, how that can open up our worldview, the different ways of emotionally regulating. So like something that is really demonized and kind of othered is the stimming that a lot of autistic people engage in, including me. If you put on my favorite heavy metal or punk music or classic rock and roll, you're going to see me stim the shit out of myself. Like I am so stoked. Like my hands go everywhere. I had a previous partner of mine who used to sort of make fun of me the way that I danced with my hands. But that's pure unfiltered release of that energy that you're feeling that is actually acting to regulate your parasympathetic and your sympathetic nervous system. Like you are feeling all these different things. And I feel like a lot of neurotypical sort of reactions to that come from this place of this like really inhibited, repressed place of like, oh no, that's really weird. Like you can't flap your hands, or you can't jump up and down, or that repetitive thing that you're doing is why you're doing that over and over again. And it's actually just self-soothe. And there's, when you show people what that actually produces, if you get them to engage in it rather than just viewing it and assuming that it is a negative thing, once people actually learn to practice those things themselves, they see the benefit in it. Like exercise is a form of stimming. It's again, it produces all those sort of chemical reactions in the brain that allow your energy systems to work more efficiently, and everyone knows that. So it's opening up that sort of window of representation to show people that it's not necessarily bad or good. It's just this whole curvilinear world of difference.
It is a lot about neurotypical norms. I get, even on this show, sometimes I get like fidgety, and by the end of an hour of very serious conversation, I'm just very jittery and distracted. I've got a bunny rabbit over here nibbling my toes, some guitars over here. And people complain in the comments that I'm like this, and they find it very distracting. And it's like, that is internalized ableism, because they just can't accept that I am needing to do that in order to keep focusing on the really heavy existential shit that's going on. It's just, and also like to add to your point, wouldn't we all, neurotypical and neurodiverse, just benefit from being a little more regulated anyway? Like,
Yeah, because again, I've made this point on other interviews about how, as a society, particularly in the West and particularly in urban settings, we've become, ecologically speaking, very divorced from a natural life. You know, like a lot of people are sedentary, a lot of people are indoors most of the day, and that's not how any being, human or otherwise, is set up to function and engage with the world. And so I think that again, like I come back to that. Yeah, this it's not us that are inherently broken or not working properly. It's the world, the conditions of the sort of a very fundamentally capitalist world that we're living in, which extracts everything. It's all extractive. It's our time, it's our energy, it's our, it's our labor, that we're giving disproportionately to the time and the energy that comes back to us, that allows us to operate, in that sort of window of tolerance, as they say in therapy speak. But yeah, I don't know.
um,
I highly recommend, like I've right next to me, you can't see it off screen, but I am an illustrator. So I, at any given time, have like 500 pencils somewhere near me so that I can do drawing. But I challenge you to get a box of just like disorganized pencils and arrange them according to the color spectrum, and it will make your day.
I mean, yeah, it does sound pretty exciting. Um,
Or in my case, go for a 60-kilometer run.
no way, I'm going to do the pencil thing. Uh, the amongst the neurodiverse community, there is a discussion that I don't know whether it's crossed into the mainstream, and it is about the reason why fascists keep targeting autistics and neurodiverse people across history. And the view tends to be that autistic people in particular, talking about these character traits that neurotypicals don't have to the same degree, things like empathy, pattern recognition, an aversion to artificial hierarchy, a constant need to question things. Sound like I'm describing you, Grace. A constant need to question things that you see as illegitimate, and a deep sense of moral justice that can be wounded. Is that why fascists don't like autistic people?
I would say you've made a pretty good case there, Dave. I do tend to agree. I think it's any difference, and we've seen this again throughout history. Obviously there's the focus on the Jewish population, which were disproportionately targeted by the Nazi regime. 6 million Jews. It's horrific. The Nazi regime also targeted homosexuals, people with disabilities, and other marginalized groups in their sort of like, yeah, eugenicist.
Communists and socialists too.
Yeah, communists and socialists as well, in their pursuit of this, superior race. It's typical supremacy ideology of this systematic discrimination and dehumanization of those deemed inferior, or other, different in some way threatening, which I think it's so interesting because, as sort of we've touched on already, difference is not a threat. It allows us all as a collective to explore different options, in particular if we're thinking about facing myriad problems in the world. Having a cohort or cohorts who can offer a different perspective, who can potentially engineer a different way forward, that benefits everyone. And yet there's it's sort of key to that supremacy ideology that the way that those within that supreme demographic, they think the best, they know that they know the only way, and that they are the best, and so they reject anything that challenges their status quo. And yes, in particular, autistic people who, as you mentioned, often are able to, because of their neural wiring, they're able to identify patterns where others might not be able to, and like think differently. Like I personally am a visual thinker, and I often see colors and things in different ways, which helps my artistry, even though I'm actually I'm legally blind. My prescription is like +4 or something like that. So I'm wearing contact lenses right now. But like, it's things like that, like seeing that ability to glean different interpretations of sensory inputs that we're all exposed to is a good thing.
Okay. Well, it does seem to me that, a nice collection of pencils and a lot of exercise is a better approach to autism than potentially getting stuck into Tylenol and pregnant women. But it is just the latest in the American kind of assault on science at the moment, Michael, which has seen, outbreaks of measles in areas where it had previously been more or less eradicated. There's just so many fronts on which science and rational thought and, the rule of law is being undermined at the moment that it's hard to keep up with it all. And, who knew Tylenol was going to be next?
Yeah, and I think part of the trick is to keep us focused on each fresh atrocity. So, we spend a week or 2 weeks obsessing about Tylenol and autism, and they've moved on to another 50 even more outrageous things. And that assault on our senses, on our, not just our sense of reason, but our sense of, everything, like, is designed. And what it is designed to do is to force us to shut off our rational brains altogether as a defense mechanism and activate only our reptilian brain and just act in threat response. And to feel at that point that our only possible response is freeze and just put up with whatever is going on for survival, for basic survival. This has nothing to do with the specifics of any particular aspect of it. It's all part of the same plan. It's a mechanism. It's an organic mechanism, and the rule of law is just another one of the constructions of a civil society of an enlightened community that wants to get on and live together and progress together to make a better world. It's just one of those pieces of architecture that has developed over the centuries to enable that to happen. The law is a critical glue because it provides the rule book for how do we get along, how do we solve problems without shooting each other, how do we avoid anarchy, how do we stay out of the jungle. So the rule of law has to go in the Donald Trump conception of the world. And so again, it's an assiduous assault on every element of that. So, so they went after the law firms very straight off. They went after all the big law firms, and that was just pure mafioso protection racket action. Like either fold or go, or you're done. And huge numbers of massive law firms folded instantly. They went after the law schools and as part of the universities, altogether. And they're going after the courts because the judiciary is one of the independent arms of government. It's there to hold the other arms of government to account. It operates independently of the executive government and of the legislative government. And in theory, the judiciary, the court system, is the ultimate backstop for democracy. That's the constitutional design. It's there to ensure against tyranny. That's and it won't, in my view.
Well, there has been some success in the courts, not obviously, and the big elephant in the room there is the Supreme Court and the way that has been stacked with just like fundamentally unqualified, if not themselves criminal individuals. But at a lower level, we have seen, well, first of all, there have been lawyers who have been actually developing oppositional and resistance strategies, which have been more effective in some ways than certainly the Democrats' strategies to date. So trying to stop some of the worst excesses, and particularly these sort of random executive orders where Trump seems to think he can just rule by fiat, when they're actually saying, well, no, this is not constitutional, and therefore what they've been fighting back. And even the attack on Comey, James Comey, for example, whilst the DOJ is utterly politicised, you've been seeing the magistrate, Lindsay Barlow, kind of push back and go, well, hang on, what is this? And even it just seemed it actually got up in the grand jury by the skin of its teeth, and that was before any defence at all had been mounted. So there have been considered concerted strategies by lawyers, public interest lawyers, at the kind of federal court level, which seem to be having some success?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's been, lawyers are our best hope, as always. They are our superheroes. No, it's been amazing to see how brave, particularly a lot of judges in the lower courts in the US have been, not just standing up and refusing to sanction the illegal acts of the executive, but increasingly delivering really strident rulings and opinions and saying, this is not on. I read one yesterday by a federal judge about the wearing of masks by ICE agents, and just, this diatribe about how anti-constitutional, anti-democratic, anti-American that is, and how completely wrong it is now. Everyone should be, this should not be allowed in America. And he kicked out a case against ICE on that basis alone. So it's all very, that gives us hope.
But you don't think it's going to hold, do you, Michael?
No, I don't, because the Supreme Court was pre-corrupted before this administration began, and it is supine and complicit. And it has already made a significant number of rulings that simply do the bidding of the administration, and will continue, unless something dramatic changes with that 6-3 majority. It will continue doing that, and it will paper over and lend constitutional legality to pretty much whatever Trump wants to do. It's already given him immunity for anything he does in office. It's constantly watering down and overruling lower courts as cases reach it. And I don't have any doubt in my mind that Supreme Court bench will be handmaidens to tyranny. Like, I don't, they're just not going to stand. They're not going to stand up against it. And that's the apex of the whole architecture of the court system. I don't think in the end it matters what judges in lower courts do, because the administration is already openly defying court orders. It's already refusing to do what judges say, and that's going to end up in the Supreme Court eventually. Who's going to say, that's
probably
of course
fine.
It's all right. I mean, the president, sometimes he just has to do stuff.
But some of them won't. It's interesting because I think there's, as of the end of August, there was something like 380 odd cases that have been brought, and about 130 had blocked the Trump, agenda, and some of them they've just not bothered to appeal. They were sort of trying it on to see how much they could get away with. I mean, I think the thing that's really interesting about the legal stuff is both how widespread it is through the sort of legal community, but more importantly, the strategy that's being used, which is a really interesting one, and that is that there's both the legal strategy and the community engagement strategy. Like for every case, they're having to find people who will be the plaintiffs, who'll be the people who are offended. They're using the unions, they're using other sort of civil society groups. It's a bit like the model that Grazie uses here. That on one level it's a legal thing, and on the other it's a community engagement strategy, and that both go hand in hand. So I think that's happening so deliberately and at such scale. sure, you're absolutely right about the Supreme Court. There's something that, there is a block at the top, but it's a novel sort of approach that is being taken to actually use that as an organising tool. So I share your pessimism, but I think that there is something quite interesting about the way that it's being approached that needs to be given its fair recognition.
Yeah, look, I think
there immediately. Immediately.
Yeah, I think it's I think the courts are acting as the man with the plastic bag standing in front of the tank in Beijing, and maybe maybe that might have been the trigger for a different outcome. It didn't. He probably got run over. But
we like to think,
and I think these efforts will be run over because what they're combating, they're playing fair against people who do not care about anything. And honestly, the only thing I think is standing in the way of Trump president for life at the moment is his apparent unwillingness to have people killed. And he doesn't get to join the dictators club until he does that, because proper dictators do that.
I mean, people have died though.
Yeah, but like actually having his enemies murdered and disappeared, he hasn't done that. And every dictator in history has been prepared to do that. They just have to. It's the old, it's necessary to maintain power.
Yeah.
So the unions have been wiped out. The universities have capitulated. Cultural institutions have given up. The law's on the fritz. By my recollection, we're up to the NRA gun nuts. It's their turn to save us from tyranny now, right? We're up to the Second Amendment people.
Yeah,
it's
the Civil War reenactors with their flintlock rifles that
that's a relief.
Need to get out there and cosplay their way back to democracy.
Yeah, I mean, I would have to say it has been interesting because, and as I alluded to last week, we've had Robodebt back in the news because of the fantastic SBS series, which has dropped, which, again, I'm going to recommend everybody watch and get enraged about all over again. And friend of the shot, Rick Morton, just won the Prime Minister's Literary Award for non-fiction for his really masterful takedown of Robodebt and how it all happened. So here in Australia, as you were alluding to, Julianne, where, that what was shown in that TV series is how much it took to find someone who was prepared to be the front person for the legal case. But that's what was needed, because all of the journalism in the world, and there was some great journalism and some great activism being done at that time, but it wasn't until the courts got involved that there was pretty much immediate capitulation by the Morrison government then. So, we're used to the idea that the courts can be our bulwark against, the worst excesses of government. But perhaps that's because we don't yet anyway have a corrupt High Court in the same way that the Supreme Court has been sort of bastardized with really kind of ignorant and awful human beings, quite apart from kind of anti-legal individuals. So yes, the courts may save us here, but not perhaps in the US, despite their best efforts and despite putting up a better fight, I think, than certainly the Democrats. And
journalism too, let's be real.
Yeah, media, absolutely. We are coming to the end of another episode of The Sunday Shot. Seems incredible to think so already. Before we go, as ever, I'm going to ask our panellists and Dave if they have any top tip that they'd like to share, anything that's caught your attention last week or that you're keeping an eye on coming up, apart, of course, from Julianne's TV series dropping on October 14, which I shall give a small plug for anyway. Michael, any top tip from you?
I'm placing a lot of hope in Greta Thunberg at the moment. Not that she's going to reach Gaza, but she's such a iconic player. What Israel does, I think she's been arrested already.
She has been taken
as we speak.
Yes.
How they handle that and how she handles that, I think, could have quite big consequences for that whole sort of scenario. So watching that with a lot of interest. She's so fearless.
She is absolutely fearless.
So,
amazing. I mean, it's kind of terrible that we have to put so much faith in a Swedish teenager, but if
Surely
anyone was to rise to the occasion,
Surely she's an adult by
Greta
now.
will. Yeah. Julianne, top tip from you.
Well, I was going to. You've stolen my thunder, Joe, because I was going to talk.
Oh,
give
I'm
a big
sorry.
shout out to SBS. You know, for doing the robo-debt thing, which is fantastic, and the final episode of that I think drops this week, which is all the one about the Royal Commission, and they do it beautifully. And then of course they start my idea of Australia. Not mine. I mean, it's huge. There's 65 people interviewed. It's 4 hours of television. It's
yeah,
enormous.
but it came from your book, so I think you can claim ownership of some sort.
They've turned it into really clever television, so it's that's the following week.
Films, isn't it?
But my only other tip, which I think it's a sort of a bit of a sleeper issue, but one that I think is really going to blow at some point, really majorly in this country. Majorly, don't you like that? It sounds like I'm talking Trump. Is the aged care stuff. The Senate inquiry report has just been released, and that's gone some way. But what we've now got in the whole aged care system is something which is going to become, I think, a real political tsunami in this country. We've got legislation, beautiful legislation, which is all couched in fabulous human rights terms about the rights of the aged to have proper care and all the rest of it. And then we've got a ration system. And the ration system is not just in the home care packages, but it's in the residential care practices. So what's happening in turning aged care into what the minister described as an investable sector, I think is going to have terrible repercussions, because on the one hand, we were saying, let's treat old people with care and respect and dignity. On the other, we've got, let's see how we can make a market out of it. And those two just aren't going to match.
I think we'll dive into that in another episode. And it is just as you say, it's just another symptom of the fact that our care sector has been privatised. The NDIS suffers, and childcare, all of these care sectors and really suffer because they're just having so much money creamed directly off the top by those who are out to make a buck. Dave, your top tip.
Yeah, well, like Michael, my thoughts are with Thunberg and the Samud flotilla. Difficult to talk about now with the pre-record situation, and it will be changing by the hour. But so I'll make a more general point that we saw Italian unions organize just the most heartening nationwide shutdown to protect the flotilla. And I guess I just want to urge Australian unionists to find their fucking spines.
Okay, that's a challenge for you, Sally McManus. You can come on the show if you like and talk us through that. My top tip is not so much a tip for the week ahead, but as I alluded to at the start of the show, I will be heading to China. So I will not be with you next week on the Sunday Shot, but as a special treat for all of our Shot family, Ms. Ronnie Schultz is making her debut on the Sunday Shot. So that will be one not to miss despite my absence, which of course I'm sure you'll all feel very keenly. But as ever, if you like what we do, please subscribe to our channel. We want to get those numbers up a bit before the end of the year. And if you've got a bit of spare cash rattling around anywhere, do feel free to throw it our way as well to keep us on air. But our thanks to Julianne and to Michael for making the time to spend with us and with you. And we look forward to seeing you, well, not me, but Dave will see you next week on the Sunday Shot.